Thank you for staying with us. It's the second leg of our conversation, and we're talking the hard facts and figures now when it comes to our economy. It's also about the recent downgrade by Standard & Poor's, and government feels that was a poor decision, that on the back of the measures that it has been implementing, Standard & Poor's should have taken stock of those and maintained our economic outlook's rating. But what exactly happened, and does government have a point? We'll be having a discussion on that in the studio with our guests who will be joining us for this all-important conversation. But let me say a very good morning to Bernice Abu-Baidoo Lansah.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Finally, you show face. You've been hiding.
It's good to be here, yeah. Good.
What briefly would be your reaction to this? They've come out, like we were saying yesterday, we've had all of them downgrading us over time.
Yes.
And stiff opposition to this one as well.
I was expecting this response from government. I mean...
You were expecting it?
Oh, of course. But government has always... I don't want to use the word defensive, but has always found a way to say it's not what it is as is being put out by these agencies. And you know, the Moody's ratings, we know what Kojo Nkrumah said about that. So I'm not surprised that government has tried to put up a defense, has tried to say maybe if you had considered A, B, C, you wouldn't have arrived at this conclusion. So let's just furnish you with the details of what government has been saying in response to this latest rating. So it says, in arriving at their decision, the credit rating agency considered the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and the severe global shock of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and Ghana and the consequent fiscal and external imbalances, elevated gross financing needs in the face of international capital market, the limited commercial financing options, and the credible steps taken by government to fast-track fiscal consolidation and the passage of key revenue bills. Now, so this is where we get to government's reaction. Government is disappointed by S&P's decision to downgrade Ghana despite the bold policies implemented in 2022 to address macro fiscal challenges and debt sustainability, which have been significantly exacerbated by the impact of these global external shocks on the economy. Continues to say that the government has implemented key revenue and expenditure measures, including the 30% cut in discretionary expenditures, the delays in the passage of key revenue measures introduced in the 2022 budget, affected revenue performance in the first half of the year. However, all the revenue measures introduced in the 2022 budget, including the review of the MDA fees and charges bill, the tax exemption bill, the e-levy bill, have all now been promulgated by Parliament. These fiscal measures are now in full implementation mode to support our fiscal and debt sustainability policies. The government is committed and is confident that it will successfully emerge from these challenges in the shortest possible time, as we have demonstrated the track record to do so in the Akakpo-led government. So just a final point on this. A current engagement with the International Monetary Fund for a program incorporating our enhanced domestic program is expected to support our drive to restore and sustain macroeconomic stability, debt sustainability, and promote growth and job creation whilst ensuring social protection to achieve our vision of a Ghana beyond aid. Benjamin. So that's government's response to that. And, I mean, the bit on the impact of COVID-19 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
The statement says it's magnified. They magnified the situation.
Yes. So, I mean, I just wanted to bring that back because yesterday we highlighted that according to the report by S&P, these factors magnified our problem. And so it's important to pay attention to the use of the word magnified. When something magnifies something, doesn't necessarily cause it, or it worsens an already troubling situation. I leave you to be the judge of that, Benjamin. But you just want to introduce our guests, and we'll zoom into that particular conversation.
All right, so we'll be getting to our guests shortly, but those are the dynamics in there that have been painted for us. And we also know that former President Mahama has been responding to the situation. He's been talking about where we find ourselves currently. Let's just take a quick look at that, and then we shall get to our guests. And so the statement reads, at least it's a post on social media: there appears to be no end to the problems with the Ghanaian economy with the recent downgrade to CCC plus, or C junk status, as he puts it. The steep depreciation of the Ghana cedi in recent days clearly shows that the mid-year review of the 2022 budget failed to win back the confidence of the investor community and the Ghanaian public. Unfortunately, no credible remedial plans have been put forward by the government to salvage the economy. A national dialogue on the economy, bringing some of our best brains together, will serve as well, even as we prepare for debt restructuring and the negotiation of an IMF program. And those are the thoughts shared there on Facebook by former President John Dramani Mahama. Let's quickly get to our guests who join the conversation now. We have Professor Godfred Bokpin, lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. Prof, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining the conversation.
Yes, good morning. Good morning to your cherished listeners and viewers.
It's good to have you. I am here together with Bernice Abu-Baidoo Lansah. We'll be engaging you on these all-important matters. But any surprise, the reaction of government to the latest downgrade by Standard & Poor's? Were you expecting this like Bernice was? Were you not expecting it? And what is the tenor of government's response for you?
I think that from the side of the rating agency, there's no surprise in there, actually.
Right.
I think...
So you expected a downgrade. You saw it coming.
Yes. Yes. Because we had said earlier that the 2022 budget and the enhanced measures the government announced were not enough in charting a fiscal sustainability path. Not enough. And then also when you look at the revenue measures that were introduced, of course, you can say that with the delay implementation of e-levy, it impacted the outcome. But it's not just the delay. This was a matter of poor forecasting, okay, an exaggeration of what could have been derived from e-levy. And we had said that the premises of e-levy, the underlying assumptions, were not realistic. As a tax handle to introduce, it was problematic. But government was so hopeful of generating over 6 billion cedis in the 2022 budget. The point also is that you know that the budget statement is not only for the consumption of the Ministry of Finance. Stakeholders are interested. This is a small open economy. If you look at our debt structure, we have commercial holdings, investors, offshore investors. So what it means is that if there is very little credibility in your policy statement, and the assumptions underlying your forecasting are unrealistic, the market can easily see that. When they see that, they will discount such news. That's what is happening. It's a matter of lack of credibility in the government policy statements, projections, and all of that. So when you project that you're going to raise 6 billion cedis, only to revise that to less than 1 billion cedis in just a matter of months, what signal does that send to the market?
Actually, revised to just about 10%, 611 million cedis.
You understand that? So these are issues that I think the government needs to take a critical look. And of course, and then again, the reaction from the Ministry of Finance, well, that is also to be expected because they've been at the receiving end, right? But if you ask me, it's almost like majoring on the minor. Why am I saying so? To what extent can you fight these rating agencies? Because the data they have referenced and all of that, they are all in the public domain. Okay, if you look at it from the local, even think tanks here, we've raised issues. Okay, and then you look at government's own drive of fiscal consolidation that is heavily revenue-based, with very little expenditure cuts. Okay, probably a combination of that would be more helpful, right? The necessary expenditure cut from the executive and all of that would help. We are not seeing that. Okay, the market is not seeing what the government is seeing. But it's not sufficient for the government to be confident about its own policy. The market must be at the same level also. But the next question you need to ask yourself really is that this rating, what will you do? Because already we have been priced out from the international capital market. I'm sure you are aware. There is no way Ghana can enter the international capital market to go and borrow. We have been locked out. That what we need to do now, probably on the back of an IMF program, will be how to re-enter the market, okay? Because when the government announced on the 1st of July of an engagement with the IMF, we saw how the spread in the secondary bond market actually narrowed. But right now, it has risen far higher, okay? So our bonds are trading in terms of the spread, close to 2,000 basis points above the U.S. Treasury yield. Okay, if you look at that, that is nothing but to cement our status as a debt-distressed country. That is a fact. You cannot be emotional about that. It's driven by the data also. But of course, we know the global imbalances and how that affects Africa broadly, not only Ghana. But to a certain extent, we've brought this upon ourselves. And you don't see, in fact, even if you look at the media review and all the measures they have announced, and you do the forecasting, you don't see a debt sustainability being anchored firmly, particularly when it relates to the variables of fiscal balance, real interest rate, real GDP growth. Already we have revised our GDP growth. In 2022 budget, the government was hoping to achieve inflation of 8% with a symmetrical rate of 2%. Just a matter of months, look at where inflation is, and look at where government has revised that to now. So I think it has also a bit to do with the forecasting, okay, and a certain posture of government that seems to be at variance with the reality and what the data is telling us. And I think that is a bit worrying, because if we are all looking at the same data, then the divergence shouldn't be that wide. But if you see the forecasting, if you see the variance and all of that, you get the impression that we are not driven by the data. And if we are not driven by the data, then that is quite worrying. And that is why we will make statements that really will turn out to be exactly the opposite. As government assume a certain posture, they will not go to the IMF, everything is on course, only to make a quick U-turn. Look, it doesn't help. And the reason I'm saying that doesn't help, and government will have to adopt that humble position, engage broadly, build consensus on the way forward, even as they engage the IMF, is very important, because the nature of our economy and the shareholding structure, the investor base of our debt stock is such that our economy is susceptible to investor sentiment and market sentiment. And so whatever you do here, people are interested way beyond the borders of this country. You're forecasting what the data is. So if we are all not speaking the same language and you want to create the impression to investors that things are okay when in the actual fact they are not, then they will punish you. And remember, it's not like Ghana has defaulted. In the financial market, it's the fear of it that paralyzes the market. It's not the actual default itself. It's the fear, the perception, the perceived increased default. Okay, probability of defaulting, that is what worries the market more. And the market will hold out for a higher yield, okay, as a way of seeking higher protection from the perceived default. And that is why we have been priced out of the international capital market.
Right.
Hold that there and come to the domestic market. You can see how the domestic market is also reacting. We are getting to the point where the domestic market itself is closing the government out. right? If you look at the rate at which the government is borrowing, you can't continue like that. You will get to a point the domestic market may price you out. Then the only viable option left will be to resort to Bank of Ghana with printing of CDs. That has its own inflationary pressures. It has its own
okay, Prof.
The local currency.
Right. Just a quick one in there. I just wanted to clarify. So you see that from where we are headed, we've been driven out of the Eurobond and international market, so to speak.
Yes.
That we could be crowded
completely.
So we could be crowded out of the local market as well, which would then leave us with just the central bank to print money, and that also has its consequences. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. That's what we are heading towards.
Right. Prof, so in its response to this latest downgrade by S&P, government expresses disappointment and says that, it was expecting, the sense you get from the response is that government was expecting not anything of this sort because of what it refers to as bold policies and decisions it took. And they cite examples about the 30% reduction or cut in discretionary expenditure, the review of the MDA fees and charges bill, the tax exemption bill, the e-levy bill and all. Do you agree that these policies are bold ones to take us out of the situation that we find ourselves in?
They are necessary, but they are not sufficient. They are not adequate to guarantee debt sustainability in the medium term. They are not. That is the truth. I don't think the rating agency is saying that they do not acknowledge these measures and all of that, but they are not sufficient. Okay, the hard bit that government needed to do, which I think would also include reducing the size of the government. I think what was on this network where I said that Cote d'Ivoire has 32 ministers. They reduced it from 41 to 32. Ghana has this number. For what end? In your first term, you made a case, given the enormity of the challenge, that this is the way it could be resolved. But clearly, the size has not demonstrated greater value. Okay, and in challenging, difficult times like this, you need to demonstrate that you yourself, you are sacrificing, right? That you are one with the citizens, you are one with investors, and all of that. Your cost-cutting measures are real, that there's enough monitoring, reporting, disclosure, transparency that allows people to see the savings and how the savings are being applied and all of that. You need to demonstrate that. Beyond that, remember that the traditional Western idea of market is driven by knowledge. So people are knowledgeable in the field enough to understand what is happening, to look at the data and see what. So, look at all the interventions and look at the fiscal balance government is hoping to achieve in the year. Okay. So how does that lend to fiscal sustainability in the next 1 year, 2 years, and the rest of them? But remember that as you do expenditure cut, fiscal consolidation, heavily predicated on the expenditure cut, expenditure rationalization, prudent spending, fine. It has implications for growth in the short term. So growth will have to be sacrificed. And that is why we have revised our growth downward. But we all know that the most effective way to manage your debt is to grow your economy. And when you expand the economy, because your debt repayment capacity is a function of your GDP growth, it's a function of your export earnings, it's a function of your revenue generation. These three are very important. So you need to look at how all these measures would impact these three put together. Then you know that there isn't much that we can achieve from the current measures. If these measures were sufficient in themselves, what would be the need to turn to the IMF?
Right.
And then I'll also tell you why this the spread in the international capital market is widening. When the government made the announcement, it came down. The long delay, okay, because the government needed to develop its own program, which it will present to the IMF. Remember, the IMF doesn't develop a program for a country. It's Ghana government program supported by the IMF. Ghana government must take that initiative and develop that program as a basis of engagement and all of that. We've seen how it was done in 2014, right from the Century Consensus, the homegrown fiscal consolidation. Of course, within 3 months or so of implementation, it became clear that the homegrown policy under President Mahama wasn't working. So they made a call to the IMF on August 6th. At that time, there was a program on hand to some extent, right? Again, apart from that, we had the Ghana Shared Growth and Development Agenda 2, 2014 to 2017, and all of that. So the government we need to stop this propaganda, emotional-driven, economic-based policy management, okay, and get to real, because the economy is real.
Prof, it's interesting you mention emotional-led economic decisions. So you earlier mentioned that the facts or the data point to this recent downgrade by S&Ps. Do you believe that government is putting out this posture so that it can maintain the little confidence that exists towards the Ghanaian economy, or it clearly is disregarding the data, or doesn't have the right data at all?
Well, what I see is that naturally that will be the reaction from anyone who is at the receiving end, right? And try to maybe create some kind of doubt about the reports and all of that. But the point that I'm making is that what do you gain by fighting that? What are the issues? What issues do you have with the methodology, the data, and all of that? Beyond the rating, what is the reaction from the domestic market? What is the rate at which the government itself is borrowing from the domestic market? Check the Eurobond market. Look at the spread. The spread right now is close to 2,000 basis points above the U.S. Treasury yield. I think apart from Zambia and one other African country, we are third in terms of the spread also. So apart from the S&P, we have other rating agencies, we have other think tanks, units that have similarly made similar conclusions. So the data is there. You can look at the data. The data should speak to us. Let's not take ourselves from the data. Remember, macroeconomic environment data is live, it's real. You can see it. And from that, you can make projections. And that is why I said earlier that I have a little concern about a certain level of optimism from government that does not mirror the reality. And it turns out to be the opposite exactly. And that is worrying.
So what do you think is causing this? So what do you think is causing this? Like I'm asking, do you get a sense that this is to portray a certain control of the situation? Is it that government wants us to believe that we've got everything under control and probably maintain the little confidence that exists? Or this is just blatant disregard for the facts and, just living in a different world of its own?
Yeah, that disconnect, I find that a bit difficult to get along with. I can't really pin an explanation to that, but you see that consistently now. You see the variance between government projections and then the actual, and then you ask yourself, what are the assumptions underlying the forecast? Okay, what interpretation do we put on the data? Do we just assume that suddenly things will just turn out to be the way we want it, or what? Because remember, countries that developed, they were intentional, and they were driven by the data. Okay, so if you are driven by the data, it makes you humble because you know that, hey, this is what the data is saying. If we do want to change the outcome, we have to do A, B, C, and the rest of them. If you are not willing to do that, and then it's a bit worrying. And when it happens that way, because then the market will read a deeper meaning into that, and they will punish you. They will punish you.
So, Prof, we're yet to get at least even a word on what the latest is with regards to our IMF program and our talks with the IMF. But as it stands now, where are we heading from where you sit? We heard from the Vice President who got a little bit of bashing when he said that things may get worse before they get better. But from where you sit, what does it look like for you in the coming months and weeks?
I think we should brace ourselves for some challenges, headwinds. When the vice president said that, I knew he was looking at the data. You know, when you look at the data, we are not going to get out of this that easily. We have to take some haircuts, some painful adjustments that we have to go through as a country. And that is where we need to recognize what the challenges are and come to terms with the reality and see how we can get Ghanaians along. It's very important. Look, we are not getting out of this that easily. The adjustment process we need to get through to bring our debt to a sustainable level is going to be painful. It's going to be painful. The sacrifices will be painful. We need to, it may get a little worse before it improves. And the challenge is that it never improves to the point where it benefits the ordinary Ghanaians. Then we are back in that cycle, right? Because 2024 election is just around the corner, right? So we only have this year and maybe middle part of next year. Then we switch into the election mode. Once we switch into the election mode, data doesn't speak as much as propaganda and all of that. So it's all about election. It's all about vote. That was what we did in 2020. So whilst government was blaming excessively the current challenges on Ukraine and COVID-19, they forgot that how we manage the monetization and commercialization of our democracy, which also showed its ugly heads in 2020, contributed to the current mess that we have to deal with. This is the reality.
Let's juxtapose two opposing sides. I want to look at how the NDC is looking at this picture, economic snapshot, and what the government has been telling us. We've heard from former President Mahama, and just to quote him, what he puts on social media, he says, quote, "The steep depreciation of the Ghana cedi in recent days," and we can touch on that as well, Prof, clearly shows that the mid-year review of the 2022 budget failed to win back the confidence of the investor community and the Ghanaian public. But this is the crucial point I want to make. He says, "Unfortunately, no credible remedial plans have been put forward by the government to salvage the economy." No credible remedial plans. Put that side by side with what government tells us. The government, in that statement, is disappointed by S&P's decision to downgrade Ghana despite the bold policies implemented in 2022 to address macro fiscal challenges and debt sustainability, which have been significantly exacerbated by the impact of these global external shocks on the economy. It goes on to talk about the 30% cuts in discretionary expenditures, among others. Has government been that bold in dealing with our economic situation post engaging the IMF?
No, that is not coming across strongly. I appreciate and sympathize with government that they are making the effort and all of that. The point is that, yes, necessary, but they are not sufficient. That is the point. So this is not like somebody is anti-republic or so. The market is broad, right? And the market is reading meaning into all of that. So if you look at what is happening, I mentioned to you the domestic market, even forget about the international capital market. You see the reaction from the domestic market and you realize that the much needed confidence that we were hoping that the media review would generate, that hasn't happened. Okay, government needs to do a little bit more. Remember these 30% cuts here and there, they are just some aspects of what we call a program. Government needs to put a program together that the IMF can support. I haven't seen that as of now. Okay, that is needed, and that is different from Ghana Care or Batampa program. That is different from saying I've cut expenditure by 30% or this or that. We are talking about a program with underlying forecasting, underlying debt sustainability analysis, projections, GDP growth projection for the next 3, 4, 5 years or so, and all of that. So that is what the market needs right now.
Let's take a look again at the different dynamics. We've heard from Dr. Marcus Ibe-Yeboah, who himself has been a member of the Finance Committee of Parliament, I think former member of Parliament for New Drabin South. And he has been a bit critical of his own administration. He has said that things are not well and that we need to get an IMF program as quickly as possible. Then we hear from Mr. President saying that there have been engagements with the IMF and that even as early as next week, we could have some agreements. Is that practical? Is it practical? And what would you want to see from any such agreements or engagements with the IMF, looking at where we find ourselves
the government
currently?
was saying that as early as next week they could have an agreement?
Some sort of agreement. He has hinted at that recently.
Well, the good news from that will be that government is willing to see to the end of a program with the IMF, which is very good. Okay, and the reason I say that is good is that if you look at the posture of the government before 1st July, and then post 1st July, that is an admission, a recognition that the problem is beyond homegrown measures, and therefore we need this kind of engagement with the fund. Typically, the negotiation and all of that will take a while, and all of that. Even in 2014, when government made a call to the IMF on August 6th, even when we had the homegrown fiscal consolidation derived from Royal Safety, and then also the Ghana State Growth and Development Agenda 2, and all of that, the call was made on August 6th. The program kicked in on April 3rd, 2015. Okay, so look at it. August 6, 2014, the program kicked in April 3rd, 2015. Okay, so designing a program is a very intensive, it requires that technical insight and all of that, and the necessary data gathering, modeling, and all of that. So if to say that the program could be agreed maybe next week or so, I have not heard that though myself, but I think there's a lot of engagement that will need to take place before we have a program agreed that will have to go to the IMF Executive Board for approval and all of that. So it's still a long way to go. But the good news is that the government is committed. The government wants the program to happen and all of that. It's not only government. I mean, this is what we have been calling for. We did so not because we would choose the IMF over our own sovereignty in managing our own economic affairs. What we failed to do over the years is what has brought us here. So the IMF is more or less a last resort now. That's a last resort. It's not like it's a first resort. Okay, and if we make it look like getting a good deal from the IMF is an achievement, that is not an achievement. Okay, because that's the last resort. The first resort is you being in charge and doing the right thing systematically, persistently, and getting the results that you desire. And because when you get to the point where you show up at the IMF, well, if you get a good deal, how does that represent performance? That doesn't represent performance. Okay, so we are in a mistake. We need to get out of this.
Just to run this by you as well, it's quite a list, but I want you to just follow me on this and tell me what you think. You can pick and choose about what will work for Ghana. Steve Manteyao, Dr. Steve Manteyao of the Public Interest Accounts Committee has, of course, formally, yes, has been speaking about our economy. He's been posting on social media. And recently he came out with a 17-point homegrown strategy for getting Ghana out of its current difficulties. He posted on social media. It's not the first time he's basically reposting. And he says, and I'd just like you to walk with me through this and then focus on the ones that you agree with. 1, cuts the size of government to 50, not more. I'm sure he's referring here to ministerial positions. 2, abolish all deputy director positions created in SOEs and parastatals after 2017. Deputy directors should go. 3, reduce number of presidential staffers. 4, make free SHS progressively free. Parents must pay for feeding if they opt for boarding. 5, convert teacher trainee and nurse trainee allowances to students' loan. 6, restore road tolls, but this time collect upfront, incorporating it into roadworthy collections. 7, abolish e-levy to grow Momo business and tax the telcos for the resulting growth in income. 8, prioritize the APFA expenditure to focus more on job creation. 9, stop further disbursements to the National Cathedral. 10, abandon the Ejapa deal. 11, implement the tax exemption law. 12, undertake lifestyle audits for tax purposes. 13, show greater commitment to fighting corruption. 14, remove ministerial discretion on capping of the stabilization levy to grow the fund. 15, restore distribution service charge 2 in the electricity tariff formula. 16, implement measures to stem illicit financial flows. And 17, crucially, abolish ex gratia. Which of these would you pick? Which of these would you say at an imminent level we could be looking at or should be doing?
Okay, so you can categorize that into two, expenditure-based and then revenue-based. So let's look at the revenue-based. Abolish e-levy. I support that 100%. And I will not change my view because e-levy is anti-growth. E-levy is regressive. If you look at the growth potential of the digital economy, it's inappropriate to introduce e-levy at the rate we even have it right now. So that should be abolished. Clear. Then we are also looking at the exemptions. Exemption bill has been passed. Good. It means that government is already thinking in that direction. Great. Then you're also looking at maybe some audit lifestyle, revenue leakages, the rest of them. Broadly, we need to look at that. Then also, we need to look at taxation of high net worth individuals. We need to begin that conversation, right? We need to begin that conversation and align the data and the data gathering system and all of that to make sure that we are able to, those who are worthy, right, are able to put a lot more on the table to aid the recovery and then our inclusive growth. That's fine. Then, crucially, the expenditure side. Reduce the number of ministers. We have said that before, right? We told you the number of ministers Côte d'Ivoire is operating with, right? So we can make some savings from there. Apart from that, even reducing the ministry, right, to about 20, and then the number of ministers, we can make a lot of savings. You can check the Appropriation Act 2021 and look at allocations to almost all those ministries and all of that. If you collapse a good number of them, those savings are immediately available. Great. Then, look, and even if you talk about even pre-senior high school, to date, how much have we spent? In dollar terms, how much have we spent? Okay. Meanwhile, the country that claims cannot fund pre-senior high school is able to accommodate annually $3 billion annually in corruption-related activities in the public sector, including procurement, infractions, and all of that. From the Auditor General's report, is $3 billion annually. Okay? So if you look at the leakages that we are able to accommodate as a country, pre-senior high school is not a problem. Okay? If we're able to do the necessary expenditure cuts and all of that, you realize that pre-senior high school is so small in this discussion that unfortunately we are making it look as though pre-senior high school is the reason we are in this mess. No, we are majoring on the minor. Let's focus on the corruption leakages in government and let's see how we can tighten all those loose ends, okay, and make sure that the little we are able to generate, we are able to use them optimally, value for money. If we did that, you realize that pre-senior high school is not a problem. I'm not saying that we can't review it, but what I'm saying is that putting it side by side, all that is happening, we realize that we are comparing apples to something perhaps infinitesimal. That is how I look at it. You check the Auditor General's report. You check annually. Look, it's been documented that Ghana loses averagely $3 billion annually through corruption. If you open it up, you will see it manifesting in various channels, procurement, infractions, and all of that. But of course, this is not unique to only this government, right? This is Ghana. It cuts across different regimes. It's not like the previous government was an exception to this and all of that. But once we are at this stage and we are talking about it, let's build consensus along those lines and say that it is not only about we not being able to generate a lot of revenue, but we must focus on expenditure side, efficiency in an investment management process, close all the leakages. Studies have shown that Ghana loses as much as we're able to generate by way of tax revenue. This is real. Okay, so if we can focus on all of these things, you realize that how much are we getting from the IMF? Assuming we even get $3 billion, okay, which will be spread over a 3-year program or so, that is far less than how much we lose annually through corruption alone. Right. So if you look at the mathematics analysis, you realize that, look, we brought this upon ourselves. And if we want to get out of this, we must be bold. We must build consensus about where the critical issues are, and we must focus on those ones. If we could do that, if we did that, you realize that we'll be able to create fiscal space. It may not happen in a year, but if we sustain that consistently for the next 15 years or so, you will see the effect. You will see that, because what we are asking for is not something we can deliver in a year or two or so. No, look at Rwanda. For how long Kagame has been there, the consistency is beginning to show. If they are able to sustain that for the next 15 years, you will see where Rwanda will be.
Let me just sneak in this bit ahead of winding down on the conversation. There are two quick issues. Some have suggested there could be a further downgrade, and some are even referring to where we are now as junk status. If there is a further downgrade, which would mean maybe a CCC minus or anything below that, according to the ratings agencies, first of all, what would it take to get there? What would be the implications of that if we got there? And the other bit I want you to address quickly. We're getting into an electoral year. From next year, 2023, the politics will start, and then you know what happens. There'll be more spending. The political system will be charged and all of that. And usually it creates a sort of crunch in the economy. How do you foresee that too will impact our economy and any program we could get from the IMF? So two things I want you to look at. A further downgrade. What could cause a further downgrade, and what would be the implications of same? And then heading into an electoral year, what would be the impact on the economy, even if we got an IMF program?
Okay, I think that now that government is engaging the fund, the next round of rating, my expectation is that it will not be a downgrade. It will not be a downgrade. And also, if you look at the revenue measures that the government has put in place, if they're able to monitor that effectively, with the exemption regime and all of that, then probably we should see some improvement. As I said earlier, these are necessary, but not that they are sufficient. So I am not expecting a downgrade. I mean, I can't wait that for Ghana at this stage, even with the current status. With all these downgrades and all of that, it has implications for banking sector stability, it has implications for financial institutions that have positions, have invested in Ghana government instruments, because in the risk-based capital management, if the risk goes up, then it means that financial institutions have to make additional covering in terms of bringing in additional capital. If they can't afford that, then it means that they would exit. So that itself will have implications for portfolio flows and all of that. So it doesn't have to get worse than this now. What we need to do now is, how do we work hard? And also the ministry needs to communicate timely disclosure of information. For instance, government announced 30% count, fuel this, fuel that, and all of that. There should be regular updates, because the market needs information. Regular updates, the savings, how they are being applied, okay, tax compliance measures, expenditure rationalization measures, and all of that. Regular updates, disclosure, transparency, and all of that. Okay, speaking the truth, right? This is not about emotions and all of that. So, but I know the government is doing quite well in some areas, but I think we need to intensify that. Now, the biggest threat to any IMF program right now, assuming that happens anytime soon, will be the 2024 election. How do we design a program that can offset the usual political business cycle and the fiscal indiscipline that is associated with almost all the competitive elections that we've had, with the exception of 2004? Okay, with the exception of 2004, so that we can undo the election excesses, which tend to also fuel inflationary expectations.
Prof, so I'm looking at the front page of the Daily Statesman, and the president says there's hope for economic rebound. He was speaking on North Star Radio yesterday. Now, the president admits that there are difficulties, and he says he'll be the last person to minimize the challenges that we are going through. But in assuring Ghanaians, this is what he says. He says, this government took our economy from one of the lowest growth rates in our modern history when I came into office in 2017 and brought it up to one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It was this government which did that, and this government was able to steer Ghana through the COVID-19 pandemic. Looking at what the president says was done in 2017, obviously the circumstances aren't the same. But are you confident, based on the policies government says it's taking, based on its decision now to go to the IMF, that we will see what the president is touting here in a few months or weeks to come? We will see this government take us back to that status that we were in 2017 when it took over.
Okay, thank you very much. I agree to some extent because Ghana has a high growth potential. We know that. How do we turn that growth potential into actual? That is where the challenge is. So it is good that the president is signaling that we can get there. We can get to the high growth trajectory that we saw 2017, 2018. But fine. But even in 2017 and 2018, we had issues with the growth. We are talking about quality growth. We are talking about inclusive growth. We are no longer going to celebrate growth that is driven largely by hydrocarbon production, oil and gas, then mining, because that kind of growth does not come along with job creation. So if the president wants to achieve that, then we are saying that we don't want to achieve that anymore through oil and gas volume production, favorable world oil price. But we must look at the labor-intensive subsectors of the economy that can actually drive growth. If that labor-intensive subsectors of the economy drive growth, then growth will be sustainable. Then growth will be job-rich. That is what we are talking about. And what comes to mind readily will be agriculture and agribusiness. We must invest appropriately, efficiently, prudently in agriculture and agribusiness. That is a must. If we had done that, I can assure you that our inflation wouldn't have been where it is now. Because if you look at food inflation and even local inflation, you can see that is also rising. You can't blame that solely on bullets flying across borders in Ukraine, Russia. No. That is more a reflection of domestic policy failure also. So we must do that. So to get to that high growth trajectory like we saw before, we must focus on agriculture, agribusiness, link that to industrialization, and make sure that we spend efficiently and prudently to oil the growth drivers of the economy. That way, we will see job-rich growth. Because from 2017, whilst we saw growth going up, we also saw unemployment going up because that growth wasn't job-rich. It was jobless growth. We are no longer going to celebrate any growth like that anymore. We are looking at inclusive, broad-based growth. Growth that also comes along with job creation. That is more important now. And we know, even from the social accounting metrics, that the output multiplier, income multiplier, and then employment multiplier from increased output in agriculture is one of the highest in Ghana. And the inequality reducing effect of agricultural productivity growth is so high, above 40%. So what that means is that if we are driven by the data, for instance, if you increase agribusiness output by $1 million, that alone will create 750 jobs along the path. This is evidence on the ground. Okay, so if you want job-rich growth, you want growth that will benefit Ghanaians, then you are looking at the growth being driven by the intensive labor subsectors of the economy. If the growth is driven by the subsectors of the economy where majority of Ghanaians derive their livelihood from, then that growth will benefit Ghanaians. But if the growth is driven by hydrocarbon production, if the growth is driven by oil and gas, how many Ghanaians draw their livelihood from that subsector? How many Ghanaians draw their livelihood from mining, which is these days with greater reliance on technology and the rest of them? So let's look at it broadly. Let's look at where we can induce growth that will be more inclusive, and growth can only be sustainable when it is inclusive. Those are the things that we need to focus our attention on.
Grateful for your time this morning, Professor Gov't Bokpin, lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School, and we've been discussing government's response to S&P's recent downgrade of the Ghanaian economy. We've been touching on what government should be doing and whether the policies government refers to as bold are actually bold indeed and will take us out of the woods. Benjamin and I have been having this conversation with Professor Gov't Bokpin. Thank you once again, Prof, for your time.
Thank you, and have a blessed day.
You
God
too,
bless
sir.
you.
Bless you too.
All right, so Professor Gov't Bokpin, the lecturer, University of Ghana Business School. It's been quite a conversation, hasn't it?
Definitely.
At least we can recall that he says he's not expecting a further downgrade. Hopefully something happens, but the imminent need for a program is clear. And hopefully we get there as quickly as possible, as Dr. Marcus Ibeyebua will paint the picture.
Yes, and he also mentions that we would have to take some really hard, painful decisions if we need to get out of the woods, and agrees with the Vice President when he says things will get a bit tough before they get better. So we've been asked to brace ourselves. Hopefully we would see some improvement in the economy as the President assures that there will be a rebound.